Kindly like, share and subscribe. Stop Eating is a scary story for children about an old woman whose grandson stuffs his face with food. It is based on a tale from Russia. There was a young boy named Peter who lived with his mother in a rundown apartment building. His father had deserted the family shortly after he was born. His mother was an addict and she didn't take care of Peter properly. The young boy often had to root around in rubbish bins to find something to eat. One day, Peter came home to find his mother lying on the kitchen floor. She had died of an overdose. Nobody knew how to contact the boy's father, so he was sent to live with his grandmother. Peter's grandmother loved him very much, but she was a poor woman and could barely afford to feed herself. She had a small kiosk near the train station where she sold cigarettes to passers-by and earned a meager living. Whenever she had some money, she would buy groceries and stock the fridge, but before she knew it, Peter would eat everything in sight. Peter was like a starving animal. He couldn't stop eating and stuffed his face with food until his cheeks looked like they were about to burst. It drove his grandmother to distraction. "Peter," she would shout, "you must stop eating. If you keep this up, you're going to eat us out of house and home." But Peter couldn't stop. Every day, while his grandmother was at work, he would clean out the fridge, then go hunting through the kitchen cupboards, searching for leftover food. "Peter," cried the grandmother, "I am a poor woman. If you don't stop this, we will both starve to death." When Peter still didn't listen to her warnings, the frustrated woman began to beat him. She didn't want to hurt the boy, but she had to stop his binge eating. She was 3 months behind in the rent and there wasn't a morsel of food in the apartment. Peter became afraid of his grandmother and dreaded the beatings every time she came home. He began making plans to run away from home. One day, Peter disappeared. His grandmother went around to all the neighbors, asking if they had seen him. She searched the neighborhood, knocking on doors and peeking in windows, but she couldn't find him anywhere. Eventually, she went down to the police station and filed a missing persons report, but the police could not find the boy either. A month passed, and suddenly, Peter returned. One morning, the grandmother heard a faint knock on the door of her apartment. She opened the door and saw her grandson standing there. His face was pale, his cheeks were sunken and his clothes were ragged. The old woman embraced him and hugged him tightly. All Peter said to her was, "Grandma, I want to eat." The grandmother immediately opened the fridge and pulled out everything that was there: soup, salad, sausage. As the old woman boiled the soup, her grandson sat down at the table and began to eat. Peter stuffed his face with food, cramming it into his mouth until his cheeks were swollen. His grandmother was so glad to have him back, she didn't say anything. Just then, the old woman noticed something strange. Every time Peter opened his mouth, something fell out. She looked down at the table and saw a bunch of wriggling maggots. The old woman stared at him in horror. "Where have you been, Peter?" she asked. "You know, grandmother," he replied. "You know and I know where I have been." With these words, he rose from the table. The grandmother just sat there with her mouth open, staring at him. Peter staggered down the corridor and as he neared the front door, he collapsed and fell to the floor. The grandmother ran over and gathered the boy in her arms, but he wasn't moving. His skin was gray and he looked like death. The old woman was frightened and placed her grandson on the sofa. Then she called the doctor. While she waited for help to arrive, she dashed from corner to corner, grabbing the boy by the hand, checking his pulse, but Peter showed no signs of life. Finally, the doctor arrived. He bent over the boy to take a closer look at him, then suddenly straightened up. "Old woman," he exclaimed in horror, "this boy has been dead for weeks. Look, he's already begun to rot. His mouth full of maggots." The grandmother burst into tears and said that only half an hour ago, she had fed her grandson sausage, salad, and a bowl of soup. The doctor made a call. The young boy's corpse was taken away, and his grandmother was taken to the police station. After an investigation, they decided that she had killed her grandson over a month ago, hitting him over the head with something heavy. The court found her insane and the old woman was sent to a psychiatric hospital to live out the remainder of her life. The wooden staircase is a Japanese urban legend about an apartment whose tenants always leave within a week. There was an old apartment building in Japan that was 7 stories high. The apartments were very small and decrepit and the building had no elevator. There was only a large, dilapidated wooden staircase that spanned 7 flights of stairs. Each one had 7 steps. On the first floor of the building, there was a one-room apartment, directly opposite the staircase. The landlord who owned it had a hard time finding tenants to stay in the apartment. Whenever he managed to rent it out, the tenant would suddenly leave, without ever giving an explanation. Every tenant left less than 1 week after renting the room. One day, a young man came to look at the vacant apartment. He was a college student and didn't have very much money. The apartment was very small, but the landlord was asking for a very low rent. The man decided to take the apartment and moved his belongings in a few days later. The first day that the young man spent in the apartment was a Monday. During the night, he was roused from his slumber by a strange noise. It sounded like a child's voice, echoing in the staircase near his front door. "I have reached the first step on the wooden staircase," said the voice. "What is a child doing out of bed at this time of night?" the man wondered to himself. However, he was tired from transporting his belongings and just went back to sleep. The next night, he was again awakened by the same voice calling out, "2 steps on the wooden staircase have I climbed." On Wednesday night, the voice cried, "3 steps on the wooden staircase have I climbed." The man jumped out of bed and ran to the front door. When he opened the door and looked out, he saw that the staircase was empty. An unnerving thought crossed his mind. Could it be possible that the staircase is haunted? And so it went on the same way on the 4th, the 5th, and the 6th day. Every night, the man heard the child's voice calling out. Each time, it seemed to get closer and closer. Sunday night finally arrived and the man was trembling in his bed. He thought about moving out, but told himself that he must be brave. He refused to allow himself to be scared off by a ghostly voice. In the middle of the night, he woke to hear something scratching at his door. A voice cried out, "I have reached the 7th step on the staircase." A shiver ran down the man's spine as he heard his locked front door swing open. The next morning, the landlord arrived to collect the rent. When he knocked on the apartment door, there was no answer. Suspicious about the whole situation, he took out his spare key and let himself in. Sprawled across the bed, he found the tenant's mangled body. His face bore an expression of unimaginable fear. The police came and examined the body, but no cause of the death could be determined. It seemed as if the man had been scared to death. The apartment is still vacant today, awaiting a new tenant. Over the years, all of the previous residents have fled before the week is through. They all say they left because they feared what might happen when the voice reached the 7th step. There are only 2 people who knows the answer: the dead man and the unspeakable thing that climbs the wooden staircase every night.